Welcome to From Caving In to Crushing It, the podcast for those who find themselves immersed in adversity and choose to write their story instead of having others write it for them. I'm Drew Durrani, and I'm your host. David, it's so good to see you, my friend.
Oh, it's great to be here, Drew. Thank you for inviting me.
It's my pleasure, and I love that we're in a couple networking groups together too, because I can't get enough of David Shriner-Cahn. So, David, we've been talking about a lot of different things since we've gotten to know each other, and one thing I have never really dove deep into with you is how you've gotten to where you are. I know life is not linear, and I know you didn't wake up and in diapers say, I want to do what I'm doing now. Can you just give us a little about, growing up and what has molded you into the man you are now?
Great question, Drew. And I think I'm getting closer to what I want to be doing
There you go.
at this point in life. But yes, it's definitely life is not linear. Work is not linear. It's all one big iterative process. We try stuff, see what works, what doesn't work, and hopefully we do more of what does work and less of what doesn't. Although sometimes it does feel like we're moving backwards too.
Yes.
Um,
Sometimes
yeah.
that's
So
progress. Yeah.
yeah. The sort of summary version of at least the professional side of my life is I studied engineering, which was I was kind of very strongly encouraged to do that by my parents. And I did better in math and science in high school than I did in the humanities. So it seemed like a very logical choice.
Right.
And, particularly when I was in college in the 70s, it was considered kind of a safe profession where you could make a decent living.
Right.
You go to work for some big corporation, and particularly for the bigger ones, there's usually opportunity to move around and move up. And in those days, because it was before there was portability with retirement funds,
Right.
you actually needed to be working for one employer for a long period of time to get retirement funds.
Okay.
So that was actually part of the deal. And I was off to a good start, had two different jobs as an engineer. And just after my second annual performance review in my second job, where I got a very positive review and a nice raise, a month later, my boss calls me into his office. He says, David, I have good news and bad news. The good news is you're doing a great job. Bad news is you don't have a job here anymore. And I was totally blindsided
Of
by
course.
that. And I'll come back to this because I suspect this is an area where you may find it valuable for the listeners of the show.
Absolutely.
So the short story is I ended up deciding I didn't want to have anything to do with sort of corporate life anymore. Went into the nonprofit sector, stayed there for 23 years. And then along the way, I always had in the back of my mind that I wanted more control over my career destiny, in part because of that first experience of being fired. And I decided that what I really wanted to do was to try my hand at having my own business. So in 2006, I went from being a nonprofit executive to being a solo consultant. And then the entrepreneurship is another like nonlinear journey. And today, fast forward, my focus is helping corporate refugees, people very much similar to my journey, and I think also similar to yours, people that either leave voluntarily or get pushed out of their job when they're kind of, often mid-career or later, and they want to do their own thing. So how do you actually set up the structure and have all the ingredients you need for that to work, to start, run, and grow your own business so you can just do more of what you love and get paid what you're worth and support your lifestyle.
Absolutely. So, we'll touch on this a little bit because I'm always intrigued. You had the corporate crisis happen when they let you go. What made you think that the nonprofit would be any different? And did you find any difference in the corporate mentality of a nonprofit versus a for-profit?
Yeah, those are really great questions. And the so when I was let go, it was really shocking. And I was totally blindsided by it. I was not really paying attention to the business side of what the company that I worked for was doing. I
Mm-hmm.
was focused on engineering. That's what I was taught, and that's what I was good at.
Right.
I was focused on solving engineering problems. And it and it was a time when the economy wasn't great, and it was tough to find another job as an engineer. And
Mm-hmm.
then plus my heart wasn't in it.
There you go.
And I was living in Boston at the time,
Mm-hmm.
which was not really a great market for chemical engineers. There were lots of other kinds of engineers, but
Mm-hmm.
not so much in my specialty.
Right.
And relocating to the kinds of places where I was more likely to find employment was not so attractive. I remember going to a job interview in in a light bulb factory in the middle of Ohio, and I'm like, it's like I just couldn't see living there.
Yep.
And I wasn't alone. I was married, and
Right.
newly married,
Mm-hmm.
and it just didn't seem like the place to start a family.
Right.
Didn't speak to me, and that was true for a lot of different places where I might have found work. And again, the economy wasn't great, so finding work in my field actually wasn't as easy as it might have been.
Right. Right.
And then yeah, so I was struggling with finding something that I thought would involve perhaps a higher purpose
Mm-hmm.
plus
Right.
plus being able to make a living.
Right.
And um the unemployment was pretty long. It was over a year. And I ended up on the recommendation of a good friend of mine, ended up signing up for a professional kind of professional / personal development program
Okay.
called life work planning, which is about creating a whole strategic vision and strategic plan for your life,
Mm-hmm.
including work and other aspects of how you spend your time.
Right.
And came out of that with this aha that there are ways that one could do something that is more satisfying, and really would speak more to what nourish I thought would nourish my soul.
Right.
And doing some market research led me to try to get a job in the nonprofit sector, which I did. Once I sort of was really clear on what I wanted to achieve and how to do it, I ended up getting a job offer that I thought was the right kind of job offer
Right.
within 2 months
And
in a
did
totally different field.
I was going to say, so nothing to do with engineering.
Nothing to do with engineering. The closest that I would say came to engineering was when the boiler broke in the facility that I was managing. Um, I sort of knew a few tricks to kind of get
Yeah.
it to restart.
Yeah. Well, did you
But
consciously avoid engineering when you looked in the nonprofit sector?
yes, I consciously avoided
Okay.
engineering, anything corporate.
Yeah.
So that, so I ended up doing the kind of work that did have a much more direct impact on people's lives,
Okay.
and I felt much better about what I was doing.
Right.
And the answer to your second question about what did I see in the nonprofit
Yeah.
sector
Right.
was actually it depended on the organization. There were some organizations that really made an effort to have, I would say, to espouse values that that involved caring for
Mm-hmm.
not just the people that the organization served, but the employees, contractors, having good relationships with vendors,
Right.
kind of doing the right thing in the way they did business. And then there were others that behaved very similarly to to my last corporate experience.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
and and the longer I was in the nonprofit sector, the more I noticed those that didn't bend over backwards to kind of care for employees,
Right.
which is also part of what led me to want to just have more control over my income.
Right. It's interesting when we talk about nonprofit. I always was not a fan of that term because I thought it was somewhat misleading but all those organizations still want to have a profit, which is revenue over expenses. It's what they do with that quote unquote profit, and whether it's reinvested in the organization for nonprofits or given to shareholders for the for profit. So in my experience, yeah, it depended on the organization, the distinction between
Correct.
the two.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, this is something I tell people that are in the nonprofit world,
Yeah.
including clients of mine that are nonprofits,
Right.
is being a nonprofit doesn't mean that you can't make a profit or shouldn't make a profit. In
Right.
fact, I believe as a nonprofit, you should make a profit because
Absolutely.
there will be lean years when you need to have assets to carry you
Mm-hmm.
through. It takes a long
Absolutely.
time to kind of develop a new funding source,
Absolutely.
and a funding source can dry up really quickly, and I've seen
Yes.
it happen where
Mm-hmm.
organization loses 20, 40, 50% of their revenue overnight,
Right.
and unless they have money in the bank, they're not going to survive. So
Absolutely.
that's really important. The only thing that's different is if you're a nonprofit in America, you're
Mm-hmm.
tax exempt.
Exactly.
So you're not actually exempt from all taxes, but you're exempt from a lot of taxes.
Right. No, so true. Absolutely. So there's two things that I heard. One was your heart wasn't in it with the engineering, and that comes back to passion, doing what you're passionate about. And the second thing was that you were newly married when you lost your job. So I want to touch on both of those. The first part, the belief system. You went into engineering because it was suggested to you by your parents that would be a good place to go. What are your thoughts about what truly is your belief system versus what was the belief system that was taught to you?
Well, I think the older we get, in our existence on this planet,
Mm-hmm.
the more we realize that we may have started off with a belief system that was imparted to us, suggested to us, or
Mm-hmm.
dictated to us
Yeah.
by those around us, and the more we are able to come up with our own belief system. And different people progress at different rates and at different
Absolutely.
stages.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was I grew up in a family where it was challenging to have your own belief system.
Yeah.
Let's put
Yeah.
it this. Let's just put it that way.
Yes, and I can relate to that. Yeah, and we're usually put on the path of what conformity is in the in the environment at that time. And yeah, I was definitely in the same boat you were. The other thing that struck me is newly married, lost your job, and you were looking even in places that were far away from where you lived, but you still kept to the gut feeling that this isn't right for you. How did that work with a new relationship with your wife and you two working together? That's not necessarily a compromise, but something that you can collaborate on and make it good for both of you and the relationship.
Well, yeah, I would say that um, financial stresses are often the triggers
Mm-hmm.
for all kinds of things,
Right.
including in relationships. I have
Right.
to say that I feel blessed that my wife and I have always had a pretty communicative relationship
Mm-hmm.
where we're um, generally on the same page about the important things in life.
Right. Right.
And um, now it seems even easier to say because we've been together for
Mm-hmm.
um, at this point it's 43 years.
Oh,
It's
that's
a
wonderful.
long time.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
But at that point, the story we're talking about is, we had been married for 2 years at that point. So
Okay.
it was pretty early on.
Yeah.
We had just bought our first home. So there was a mortgage.
Yeah.
So there was that pressure.
Yeah.
And she had just graduated from grad school in a field where suddenly there were no entry-level jobs.
Oh boy. Okay.
So basically we were in a very tough spot financially, which added a lot of pressure to everything. And it didn't seem like there was an easy way out.
Right. It sounds like you had a solid foundation in the relationship that could withstand something heavier, like the economy and your finances and the job. So kudos to you and your wife for building that solid foundation. So, because you know what happens when we have a weak foundation, you put anything heavy on it, it collapses. So,
yes, and I've seen that way too many times with other people. So we've been very blessed that we've been able to weather a lot of storms in our lives.
Wonderful. I want to learn a little more about the transition from nonprofit to where you are now and that entrepreneurial spirit. And you had said we're going to get back to that. So I guess now might be a good part to get to that. Yeah.
Yeah. So as I said, I was in the field for 23 years and I had 3 different jobs. I had a job that was 3 years, 2 years, and then 18 years. So the last one was a very long run. And I started off in a number 2 position in a small education agency. And I ended in a number 2 position in a bigger, more complicated education agency.
Okay.
So the organization grew, the responsibilities grew, the staff grew, the income grew. And there was I don't, as I said earlier, I had always thought about like what would come next. Because I learned early on that you always need to be planning what's going to come next, and you need to have alternatives in your plan because you never know how things are going to work out.
Right.
And I thought about actually doing something as an entrepreneur when I had lost my engineering job. I didn't know anybody who was an entrepreneur. I had no clue how it worked.
Right.
It couldn't happen at that point. But I did pay attention to other people that I saw who were successful entrepreneurs, and particularly in the nonprofit field. Many of the board members that I had worked with and got to know really well were very successful in business.
Okay.
That's how they got to become philanthropists.
Right. Absolutely.
And so I had thought long and hard about trying to make that leap. And I had a good friend of mine who actually, like me, studied engineering. He ended up also leaving corporate life early on in his career and went into his own business as an engineer. And he kept saying, David, why don't you just, do what I do? And I'm like, well, I don't know. I need the paycheck. But you know the whole scenario.
I certainly do.
And, sometimes life gives you opportunities, whether or not you're ready for them.
Yes.
And there were 2 things happen kind of in close succession. One is I was asked to be part of an executive education program for nonprofit leaders to sort of give me the formal training that I'd never had all those years.
Right.
So I was in this program that was associated with the Columbia Business School, which is a great school. It was a great program.
Yep.
And basically they were grooming those of us that were in the program to move up a notch in the organizational hierarchy, in our field.
Right.
And just as I was finishing the program, the board of my organization made a decision to hire a new CEO.
Don't you love that? The timing.
Right. And so the person who had hired me at that point, it was 17 years earlier, and was going to be stepping aside, but not leaving the organization. They found a new role for him.
Interesting. Okay.
Right. And they were going to bring on a new CEO. And the new CEO was somebody I knew well because he was actually a board member.
Interesting.
And he and I had some overlap in skills.
Okay.
And I saw, okay, so this organization is now paying 3 big salaries instead of 2. I don't know that this is going to last that long.
Interesting.
And there's probably not going to be room for all 3 of us. And I know which one of us
Yep.
may need to find some other way to make a living.
Yeah.
So in fact, that did come to fruition. It took a year.
Right.
But I thought, okay, so I now have this training. I have all this experience in the field. What do I really want to do? I really want more control over my career.
Right.
I'll become a consultant.
Okay.
And I had worked with lots of consultants.
Of course.
I had friends who were consultants.
Right.
Thought, how hard can this be?
Right.
So I waited until I got pushed out because there would be a little financial cushion to
Of
be
course.
able to get my business started. So
Of
I didn't
course.
actually do anything other than think about it until
Right.
I had to.
Yeah.
And then, as I said, a year later, I was asked to leave. And I said, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be a consultant. And I started telling everybody I knew, and I started getting some business.
Good.
So it wasn't like, the first day that I announced it, but within a few months, got the first client, got a second client. And actually the transition worked okay.
Right. Yeah. It's always good when you can do consulting in a field that you're an expert in. So finding the clients was a little easier than if you had broken away and been a consultant in something completely new.
Right. If I had tried to do something brand new,
Yeah.
I think it would have been pretty hard.
All right. Well, tell us about I got a couple last questions, and I want to promote you. So we're gonna have to find out how the audience can find you. Last 2 questions. David, you're sitting down with 7 to 10-year-old David, and you're gonna give him advice about life. What are you gonna tell him?
I'm going to say a few things. First of all, I like the way you kind of introduced this whole idea that life and careers are nonlinear.
Right.
So to think about how that plays out and be prepared for it.
Right.
Always be planning. I think you always need to have a plan B and
Mm-hmm.
be ready to actually execute on it. That's really important.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that I think is really important is not to be afraid to try something new,
Mm-hmm.
particularly something where you don't have all the pieces in place.
Mm-hmm.
And as an 8-year-old, it's easier to do that than as an 80-year-old.
Right. True.
Right. The older you get, the harder it is to do, the
Yeah.
more accomplished you become in your field,
Mm-hmm.
the harder it is to step out of your comfort zone and try something new because you're used to being right.
Right.
And people
True.
people around you look to you
Mm-hmm.
for you being right.
Mm-hmm.
So it gets harder and harder to step out of your comfort zone. So that's something I would say to somebody, and to pay attention, particularly in school. School teaches us that there's right and wrong,
Right.
and that you always want to be right. And it kind of reinforces the notion that stepping out of your comfort zone is not smart.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually wrong.
Yep. It's okay to be wrong because that's how we learn.
It is okay to be wrong.
Yep. Absolutely.
Just don't do it too many times.
No, and learn
Don't
from.
do it too many.
Yeah.
Don't do it too many times with this on the same kind of step.
There you go. Learn from it and move on.
Exactly.
All right. Yeah. Now it's still you, David, but now you're sitting down with David, the new businessman, new entrepreneur. What business advice would you give young David?
His 2 things that you really need to do. One is you need to do market research.
Mm-hmm.
And the second is you need to sell, and they're distinct and they're separate. And the way you get to them is do a little bit of self-reflection, identify what it is that you most love doing, what it is you're best at doing, who you want to serve, what kinds of problems you think they have that you can solve. Then you do your market research around that to try to go deeper and learn what is it that about your hypothesis that either may be true or not true. And you got to do this by talking to people who know about the kind of problem you're trying to solve. Get some validation before you try to offer anything. Validation on the problem, willingness for people to pay for that, to pay for it, whether it is actually sufficiently profitable. And don't try to sell to people with whom you're doing the market research, because otherwise they won't be as straightforward with you. So do the market research, do enough of it so you get a sense of, yeah, I think there's a chance I can sell this, and then go out and try to sell it. Don't worry about doing anything internally with your business, business administration, your website, LinkedIn profile, or whatever it is. Just try to sell, get somebody to actually validate your hypothesis by giving you money. When that starts, right? When that starts, then you can worry about building a website for the second customer or the third customer. But get that first customer, because that's the most important validation. I've seen too many people spin their wheels trying to create something that nobody wants to buy.
That's a very good point. Clarity of purpose first, and then you build the infrastructure. David, this has been wonderful. Absolutely fantastic. The listeners are going to want more of David Shriner-Cahn. And can you please provide them, how do they reach you? What are you doing now? And how do they get to you?
Smashingtheplateau.com is the repository for all of our information. That's where you can listen to hundreds of episodes of my podcast. That's where you can learn about our fabulous community for corporate refugees that are starting, running, and growing their own businesses. I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn, so you can connect with me there as well.
That's wonderful, David. Hey, thank you so much for coming on, my friend. I am grateful that you're in my life and my community, and we're going to continue to build our relationships. Thanks again for everything you're doing for the community, David.
Thank you, Drew.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe and give us a review to help others find it. I'd like you to answer this question. Are you living the life you want to live, or are you living the life others want you to live? I'd like you to think about that for a second, because I strongly suggest you live the life you want to live. If you want to learn more about what I stand for and my services and how I'm able to help many men get out of their own way, please go to my website at www.profitcompassion.com. Feel free to also email me at drew@profitcompassion.com. I'd love to have a conversation with you. Take care of yourself and choose to write your own story instead of letting others write it for you.